It's the League of Ultimate Questing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Leveling Up Our Podcast with the League of Ultimate Questing. I'm
That's
Zach.
Us. I'm Law.
This is our first like professional panel for our show, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's especially a strange format because we're recording it here at home.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm recording it standing on top of a giant PHB, but you know,
Right. I'm just in my underwear. Right.
the beauty
Can't do
of
that at Comic-Con.
the beauty of streaming is just from the waist down, it can be whatever you want.
Mm-hmm. We could be centaurs. You don't know.
Yeah, so we're here to discuss simultaneously the League of Ultimate Questing, our podcast that has been doing shockingly well over the last year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that just sounds weird to say. And also how you can possibly develop your own skill set for making your own podcasts.
Yeah, we'd love to let you feel the feelings we feel when we look at the numbers and say, oh my gosh, people like us.
It is insanely euphoric in every conceivable way.
Why don't we introduce ourselves, kind of like our history, and that kind of set the tone for how we got into this?
Absolutely. So I'm Zach. I'm the technical director. I handle everything behind the scenes from web hosting and editing and all that other nonsense. Though lately, we've fortunately been able to actually afford to pay our own, full-time editor, which definitely helps.
Yep. My name's Law. I'm the creative director. I'm also the dungeon master for the game. I write the scripts and stuff, and basically all the story-related things. I help with some editing too, and I do the graphic work.
And as for the League of Ultimate Questing, it is just every ordinary D&D podcast, except the fact that it's set in a universe where adventuring is a major league sport, complete with fake advertisements and announcers and all sorts of other weird nonsense that basically nobody else has been doing, as far as I know, ever.
I mean, there's some kind of sports meets fantasy stuff, but this is the first podcast that's like, it's from the presentation of like you're watching like this ESPN kind of style show. There's commentators who color the scenes, they mention other teams, and they're kind of an ongoing duo of characters that narrate the story in a way, but the focus is the players. Which
for me actually moves us beautifully into the first kind of topic that we have here, and that is the concept. See, one of the things with podcasting in general is you're kind of drowning in a sea of other people's work.
Yeah. There's a lot of saturation in the D&D podcast or even just tabletop role-playing podcasts. So while we're not necessarily selling the idea that it's gimmick or nothing, it is important to find something that'll make you stand out from the others and find a very specific audience that will enjoy you.
And for us, a large part of that was the commercials. You'll actually be seeing a few of those as we progress.
Yeah.
Finding a way to inject humor into this environment, and also in a way to kind of give a nod to people who know something about the world, and it's kind of like an extra little bonus. And it's also a great way to draw people in, something you can post on social media that's a clear hook and make people click on that link.
Right. And it's funny because the majority of the podcast you'll listen to is a group of 4 very good D&D players playing D&D in this fun setting. But the elevator pitch always includes these commercials. Each episode has 2. Sometimes they're like kind of behind the scenes. Sometimes it's like a fake news broadcast, but they always have like a product.
Exactly. And that is an important part, is the fact that we are driving comedy. Now, mind you, there's plenty of drama and huge character development and really, really emotional moments in the show. But for the most part, we focus on a comedic drive, and having that theme, a tone that you can sell and let people feel comfortable with, it's kind of essential.
Mm-hmm. So you'll want to figure out what kind of theme you're going to slide into. You can do kind of like a more dark horror one where you have a really high focus on editing and voice acting. Or you
a great example of that is Dark Dice, if you haven't seen.
Yeah, with our buddy Travis. It's fantastic. They have their own music. It's got a really great grim dark setting.
Such good stuff.
Or you could find, if you have a group of people that are like, you know what, these people, every time I get them in a room together, they make comedy gold and they play D&D. That can be a good starting point.
But yeah, having that theme is always going to be important. And really, it kind of gets you moving in the right direction. It's hard to start a project that you don't feel excited about. And if you're confident that this is actually a product that people are going to listen to, that you would want to listen to, I think you're more likely to actually make the thing happen.
It's true. And one of the things you can do to kind of start that process is figure out, like, who's going to be involved. Like for me and Zach, we have known each other for a very long time. Like we've been acquainted with each other for over a decade, but the fact that we started this business together, even though we've never really been like super buddy, it was really out of nowhere. We just kind of started hanging out a couple times because we both had similar tastes in certain media coming out.
And it
this
did
came
not
out of
start as
nowhere.
podcasts. It started originally as what? Pokemon two-headed Nuzlocke. We were playing just challenge runs of Pokemon on YouTube. And we honestly thought we were going to be big hotshot YouTube stars at first.
Yeah, that was right when YouTube took a dramatic turn too, for content creators. And yeah, that's where we started. We were like, we're going to be YouTubers. But then we realized, we both have this big passion for D&D, and this idea just came out of nowhere, and we had to run with it. And I think, like me and Zach, for example, if you start this as like a partnership, we make a good team because we don't always see eye to eye on stuff. We have different approaches to creative storytelling, what's important for tech and media, but we also like keep each other in line, and we're great like creative soundboards. Like I get inspired by listening to Zach all the time.
And at first, when we were doing our scripted segments, that is to say, Kip and Storm, the announcers, or when we were doing commercials and things like that, though commercials is almost entirely law. I've made like 8 out of the 100 or so that we have. We would do a lot of bouncing back and forth, like editing for quality. Like, what does this sound like when we read it out loud and making it really sound good? And we both have just, like you said, such different approaches to how something sounds and different talents. And it just makes for a perfect combination. And really, I think most of the people that I know who've tried to get into podcasting, one of their biggest hiccups has always been motivating yourself alone and having a partner, having somebody that you're like, I know this person will drive me to do the right thing and make me, make better content. That's essential.
Right. And you have to figure out, like when is the right time to like pull the trigger? Like how many resources have you gathered up to the point of creating the podcast? Because having skill sets that each of you have, like there's a ton of stuff that Zach does that I'm horrible at, like all the RSS online stuff. I would have no idea how to set that up and make us reach people. And I've been using Photoshop for so long that we at least could start with a handful of like logos, some web design stuff, character art, things like that. So
and even some amazing commercial videos that we've seen, even just something as simple as a logo with some music. And I think one example that we have is right here.
My name is Telkadar. I'm the party barbarian. We've been adventuring for a long time, and sometimes I can't keep my rage up as long as I used to. I was diagnosed with erectile dysfunction. It affects 2 out of 5 barbarians my age. That's when I discovered Viagra. Longer, more satisfying rages for me and my opponent. I'm always ready when my friends need me to bring the fury.
Ask your party cleric if Viagra is right for you. Contact an apothecary for any rages lasting more than 4 hours. We keep you raging hard on the battlefield.
Viagra, my anger will not be silenced.
It's the League of Ultimate Questing! Find out more at slap-studios.com.
And you see something like that on social media, and obviously you're going to want to listen to more. And I think most of the people that we've had, at least a third of the listeners had to have been brought in by something like that.
Yeah, it also sets the tone, which is kind of a quick flashback to theme, is like, how adult do you want your show to be? Because we make a lot of goofs that are fairly mature. We're not super vulgar or anything, but we bring up some goofy shit.
Yeah, I said
the S word. I apologize.
This is most certainly not what you would call a PG show. We definitely curse quite a bit, and there are some adult themes. Mind you, I think a 13-year-old could listen to it without being too horribly scarred, but we definitely have the explicit tag.
Absolutely, we do. So you're going to want to you can't build a full thing if you want to do a tabletop game with just 2 people. You're going to have to start finding more people to join the team. And some of that can be the people on the on the microphone in our case. And sometimes it's the people behind the scenes. So there's a lot of ways to find those people.
Yeah, and behind the scenes is everything. Like Law was saying, his ability to do Photoshop and video editing and things like that. It's essential for when you're kind of like early on and you want to make things look professional, because that's one of the big issues for a lot of people getting started is they're nervous that they're not going to look good enough. It's going to be, chintzy or awkward. And the more effort you can put into that, the more time you can devote and really bulk it up, the better. And if you've got friends who are already excellent, web designers or Photoshop or whatever, that becomes invaluable.
Yeah. And you'll get to see it like grow with time. Like you need to start and realize like, do I know enough about like making a mix online of music to get some background music for us? Because like one example is for our theme song, we wanted something that was kind of like this NFL sounding, like the beginning of the Super Bowl sort of music with a fantasy tone. I made something, I have musical background, but I'm not a very edited like sound synth editor, and it worked. It was okay, it did the job, but after a certain point we invested in someone who's actually good at it, and boy did it sound great. It sounded so much better.
I am routinely blown away by how much you managed to do with just that one, that one initial thing. And, but yeah, that does not mean that it was not worth it. Definitely finding somebody for whom this is their job. And, there are a lot of resources online like Fiverr and things like that, where you can get yourself a reasonably priced thing that you own and it's your thing forever. There's also other resources, like you can go online and find stock audio and things like that may need some attribution or what have you, but it helps. It helps a lot.
Yeah, there's even some pages like for the music thing. We don't use any music during our show. It's just actual play, but the commercials have a ton of music. And if you use the same song in every commercial, it's going to sound really weird. Yeah. So there are pages you can sign up for made by creators who will just be like, hey, give me a donation and you have the rights to use my music, or sign up for a monthly fee and you can download X amount of files.
Yeah, and I think that is an important point that we have to make is you'd be surprised how much stuff you can find either free or extremely low cost, and other people who are trying to get in and do their own dream. They're trying to make something else happen in their life. And the more you can kind of collaborate and work together with people, the better. But I think the main feature here is how you build the right group for you, how you build your process, and how you make it into something that you can do on a regular basis. We've had, almost 90 episodes at this point, and we have not missed a single week since we started. And the only reason, yeah, right. And I think the only reason that's true is because we've had people who can take some of the load off. Now, that's not to say there aren't people out there who do everything themselves, and those people I'm blown away by. But
absolutely,
don't burn yourself out. Don't give yourself every single responsibility just because you want to be an auteur who makes the perfect artwork.
Yeah, there was a long period of time up to like our mid 20 episodes where Zach was taking the larger load of all the editing, and it was clear that it was starting to eat into his sanity and time, because it's a large commitment. And at the time, like, we both knew a bit about sound editing, but we weren't professionals by any means. So we were learning as we grew. There was a point when it's like, we need someone to come help us edit, because I would help out to help avoid fry, but I still didn't do as much. So learning not to burn yourself out.
And honestly, and that's a big part of it, being willing to learn new stuff. Like, I had never done video editing, never done audio editing, never done anything even close to it. And even just starting with the YouTube videos, I was able to figure out how to use video editing. And, if you're able to break through the inertia and the fear of failure, once you start the process, you'd be surprised how much you can learn.
Mm-hmm. Like, at this point, I'd say both of us have gone from a more novice setting in these to being professionals. Like, we could hire ourselves out to do sound and voice and stuff like that.
At least semi-pro, maybe minor leagues.
Yeah. We could go on Fiverr. We could be one of those. And for me, I went to school for animation, so I learned some random stuff about digital design and sound and video, but everything's changed since then. I'm not using any of the programs I went to school for. So always be willing to adapt. And we went through several processes of recording too, learning how to make the thing sound the best they could.
Yeah, we made some pitfalls, man, early on. I wasn't 100% on the equipment. And I mean, I'm not going to go into equipment here unless, we end up with a lot more time than we thought. But, you'd be shocked how much it makes a difference between whether you're doing digital or whether you're doing analog. We started with analog, and my first audio recorder didn't even have 5 slots. So we couldn't actually have a full D&D party. So we ended up having to get a mixer. And then I found out that mixes everything down to one track, which means editing was almost impossible. So our first 10 episodes have constant overtalk and table noise, and everything just sounds so sloppy. And I had to recently go back to the first episode and re-edit it, and I'm like, oh no.
Right. Yeah. Even having independent channels is huge. But the funny thing is, even at our beginning, people are like, this editing is pretty good, which I guess just kind of shows what's out there and what you can focus on.
Exactly. And I think, it's just a matter of doing a little bit of research, but honestly, make the mistake. If you've got the funds to kind of like jump in and just get the equipment that you think you need, once you've got that in hand and you realize you need something else, one, audio equipment sells back for a lot of money. Like you'd be surprised. It retains value for a long time. Like I'm sitting on a bunch of stuff. Like my first mics were way more, let's say they had a wider range than we wanted. And they're still worth as much as they were when I bought them. Like maybe like 10% less.
Yeah, I'd say there isn't any equipment that we have at the table that's the same we started with.
Yeah.
Even from like going on eBay as an emergency to get a headphone amp so everyone could actually monitor themselves.
Yeah.
Getting a used one, which to its credit lasted us like 80 episodes, but we were happy to upgrade. And even like being mid-recording and having to go on like a Deliver Now website to get like an XLR cable on the fly so we could actually finish sitting down.
Oh man, we had this one thing where we had one of our XLRs, specifically that time when you had to order one on the fly and get it same day delivery. We had an XLR that was popping, and so like anytime Sam, who plays Arvid in the show, would shift, their XLR would disconnect and reconnect. And the pop that came from that, it was so loud that they actually had a trauma reaction where every time they moved, they would like tense up and get super uncomfortable.
I'd almost blocked that out because it was such a horrible experience to witness their pain.
It was rough. And mind you, this is back when I was living in like this basement apartment, and they had an upstairs neighbor noise and everything like that I had to cut out. Every time they took a step, we had like everybody stop so I could cut it and then reread.
Yeah, they had a big dog and everything. And we had initially like there's a big black couch and a very, very small table. So like the mounts for the mics were behind two people and like hanging over their heads. So learning how to like improve your space while we upgraded equipment, we also upgraded the area we recorded. We have new mounts. We've upgraded to having like a second tier gaming table where we can have minis up here, character sheets down here, room for the sound equipment. So that's going to evolve. So the more time you put into that before you start, the more trouble you'll have saved down the road.
We talk about, I mean, hell, the episode here is called Leveling Up with Your Podcast. And in all honesty, that's exactly what we did. Is every time we we realized we had a little bit of money because of Patreon or because one of the few people who were willing to sponsor us for like a handful of bucks at the beginning, we would take that money and go, okay, well, we're going to get new music. And the feeling of getting that new music felt like leveling up. It felt like a really meaningful ding.
Right. And like people starting to make fan art like that for me was such a big moment where we get to see people's like drawing their versions of our characters and NPCs. Whoa, that was heartwarming.
Yeah, and it just keeps happening. Like, and that's the thing is as you start to make progress, as you start to put out the best content you can, people fall in love with it and you fall in love with them for doing so. Our Patreon now is at a really comfortable space where we can get regular updates. Every month we're buying a new piece of equipment or we're paying some people for work. And it feels so good to be able to move closer towards professionally doing something that up until now we've only ever done as a bunch of jerks in a basement.
Yeah, that's true. And there's some pretty difficult decisions along the way. Like one of the things we figured out early is that there was a lot of positive response to the amount of editing we were doing. The fact that we could make a show where we just start playing, hit record, and then end in an hour and let that be the episode. But we don't. We record for about an hour and a half, and we just kind of trim down the stuff that's not necessary. So it's a more succinct episode. And we learned early on that we have to focus on that. That's why one of our first add-ons was an extra editor. Kind of set the tone for everything we make from now on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reason why we have things like that. For example, we allow people to reread their lines. It sounds like almost nothing. It's such a relatively, irrelevant notion. But imagine you give a cool line as a character and you realize you just kind of butchered it, or you got awkward, or your voice cracks, or something like that. Just take the line again. Like it's not disingenuous or false or scripted to have yourself deliver the best line you can. Yeah. And realizing that, obviously the audience wants to hear the best line. They want to hear you sounding your best. And so when we edit, that's what we do. We don't treat it like, we're just trying to make it as short or clipped or fast as possible. We want everybody to sound the best version of them they can be.
Right. And that's true for me. Like one of the pitfalls we talked about, like we've learned from, is like as a DM, I spend a large majority of the show just talking. I do a lot of talking, and having the ability to take a line again or change the tone of something that I deliver, like add gravitas to a scene ending or something like that, it doesn't take away the fact that a lot of it's improvised or well planned. It just means we're literally kind of tuning in on that and sharpening it up.
Sometimes it really does sound like a voice acting room, where like Law will end the episode and he'll just have said it kind of like he was in the middle of a sentence. So I'm like, can you give that to me again, but like have some feeling to it? And I'm like, oh God, I really just said once more with feeling. And then he'll read it like 4 times.
Right. And I feel like that's kind of important to have, because while Zach's like at the soundboard while we play, and like, most of the work for that is like leveling in the beginning and setting up all the files. But during it, he's doing some production work in calling people out. I would help, but I'm really busy DMing. So he does a great job of handling that. People like could be not squared up on their microphone, or they could be like bumping the elbow against the table kind of thing. And having someone there who's just like a resounding referee voice for how to talk good is important.
Yeah. And really having a producer in general helps you to kind of notice what issues you're going to have when you edit too. So if your producer and your editor are the same person, or at least have done both jobs at least once, it's really incredibly useful, because a lot of the time when the people are just doing their voice acting thing, they don't have the mental alar. They don't have they don't have the ability to split their mind between I'm playing the character, but I'm also listening to the intimate details of like, did that breath sound awkward and ragged? Did I say that line right? Did I hesitate and stutter a bunch?
Yeah.
And so being able to go like, actually, hey, could you go ahead and give me that line again? It actually feels good to be given that opportunity, and to be given that same opportunity by somebody who knows what they're listening for and knows how to make it sound good.
Yeah. And it creates a degree of like trust and intimacy with the people at the table, because it's very easy to hear something like that and your knee-jerk reaction is to get upset. But we've all discussed it so much, and we know that we all want to sound good for each other, that it does kind of create this bond of trust. Even like you can sit at a group of people and be like, you need to blow your nose right now. There's a degree of intimacy there that you can't get anywhere else. It's like family.
Clear your flipping throat. But like, and that's the thing, workshopping, not just like weird things like how often they stutter and how they need to take lines slower or what have you, but workshopping their characters, workshopping their voices. You built this barbarian, but you've been playing them really shy and awkward and unfocused. Maybe try to amp that up. You've been playing a sorcerer, but you're really not casting any spells. Like, get in there, and we're constantly giving each other those suggestions. Sometimes we have sit downs that are just a couple of hours of us being like, hey, so your voice is weird, and it keeps going back and forth between these 3 different voices. Pick one and stick with it, and let's try and practice.
The same can be true through the narrative. Like sometimes what you don't hear in the recording is just before an important scene, we'll kind of touch base with each other. Not me as the DM. I'm just listening and wringing my fingers.
Right.
But I want to hear the players be like, okay, just so you all know, like, I feel like this is important for my motivation in the scene, and knowing like when something coming up is going to matter to that character, because it doesn't change how you play. It just kind of lets you know what pauses to look for.
And one way in which we can kind of make sure we have good character moments like that is if you feel like there's a scene you would love to see happen. You're playing this character and this other person, you're like, I don't know, I want to have a conversation with them about this. I want to ask them about their backstory, because we all create backstories for our characters, most of us do anyway, and we get really excited about our past and about our feelings and about how we see things, but it's easy to kind of lose that in the mechanics. And so having an opportunity to say, actually, I really want to talk to this character about where their parents are. They never talk about them. I want to know what's going on with that. And then the DM or they can find an opportunity. Hey, is there a lull here, DM? Can I slide in something? And you're like, yeah, go ahead. Bam. Suddenly you've got this really compelling scene, and you can have that meaningful drama, that role play. And it's all improvised. It's all very organic. But you just make sure that it happens.
Yeah, and we're really big on the sidebars. We'll even be like, hey, we just realized that these 2 characters haven't had a scene together in a long time. Maybe we can work that in this chapter somewhere. And even like the precursor to finding this good group of voices and how to control them is picking who your players are going to be. Like, we actually did casting. We had 2 separate casting sit downs with like 8-9 people. And choosing was very difficult because there were some good applicants.
It was rough. We had some really amazing people, and the final decision really, it was kind of, some of them were easy. Some of them we were like, absolutely, we want this person, no questions asked. Alante. The first time we sat down with Alante, we went to bars. We wanted to feel who they were as people. We wanted to kind of see how their charisma and their chemistry worked together. So we just brought them into a bar.
Yeah, let them loosen up, see how they respond to humor, see how they present themselves. And yeah, that's like that was the final cut, was like getting invited to the bar. Like, this is the last group that may or may not make it into the show. And that was the one thing, like, me and Zach went for a walk after one of our casting things just to discuss it and be like, Alante? Yes, Alante. Like,
Absolutely.
and I'm super glad we picked who we did. Like, I think it's the best team we could have.
Oh, they were flawless, and mind you, they were from all over the place. I had never met Alante before in my life.
Me either.
Originally, we had a friend of ours who recommended a few other people, and we invited just all these randos, and we sat down with them. Some of them were friends for ages. Me and Sam have known each other since high school, 15 years now. And I was like, I know they've got the energy for this. I know they've got the talent, and they have really shown themselves to be amazing. Michael, who plays Harthax, was an Orcs DM with Law here.
And he was a friendly colleague at best.
Yeah, but he just kind of blew away the character creation ideas and the answers that he gave, because we always had these fun thing where, you know, we give an audition, you have them answer questions in character, and it was so fun. I think we still have the recording for that somewhere.
Do we? That's awesome. Let's get that on Patreon.
Right.
And each player brings kind of a different thing to the table. Like, Sam has a really organic kind of humor that she brings. Like, listening to Sam kind of almost panic, but then fall into this just like masterfully delivered line that no one would ever expect. That is great for me. Michael's like a rules expert, which can be problematic. You all know this player. I'm not going to talk on that. But he will call me on my shit sometimes, and that's okay. But his involvement in the story, like, he doesn't take notes, but he reminds me of stuff that I forgot as the DM. So he's in it. And Alante is just like the most lovable person. He is his character, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's funny just how much they all kind of, to one degree or another, kind of show themselves through their character. At first, Michael was really awkward because he felt like he couldn't say anything because his character was this terse, dark, dragonborn, warlock. And then he just started kind of being Michael a little bit and throwing in these terrible puns. Just the worst puns. Yeah. And it drove me nuts.
Sure. But finding a way for, like, realizing, like, you know what, this character has a ton of comedy potential by delivering these dry lines, and it doesn't really break the immersion at all. It's just kind of who they are.
Yeah, no, and I like, even if I hated them, I obviously loved them, because clearly that's just going to be a great thing that people love in the show, and a lot of our fans are very responsive to his punishment. Good.
Well, on the topic of how saturated the world of, like, D&D podcasts are, there's a lot of them out there, and there's going to be a lot of people who want to be on your show, most likely, if you reach out to the right groups. But there are important things that we feel like you can do when choosing the people that you want to have on your show.
You're going to be tempted to kind of bring everybody in, like all your friends and everybody you know, and the guy who's been playing D&D with you for 12 years. But, there does come some of that kind of sleaziness or ugliness when you have to just straight up be like, you know what, man, I just don't think you're going to fit great. When we did our first casting, there were people that we just had to be like, you're awesome. We'd love to keep you on as an alternate, or, somebody we can bring in later. But, we've got a team here that we think is really going to work. And, that's just not going to fit. And it can be so uncomfortable because you feel like you're firing somebody and you're like, oh, this is awkward.
Right. And if you really want to put the story first, like, if you have that one person who's interested in helping and like, hey, I've got this really great room and some equipment, but they're just like not a fun person and they bring everyone down and they take away from the story, like, it's not worth it. Like, the equipment is something you can find down the road. If you're not invested in liking everyone at the table, like, it's not going to sound good.
I feel like there are some key things that you really want to look for when you're looking for cast. Crew is another story, but cast, I'd say the biggest one for me is acting talent and people who put their story first, not their character, not they themselves as the player. They're not the guy who's going to throw up the whole like, oh, well, this is what my character would do. It's about building a story and doing so together and being able to act those parts well.
Yeah. And making sure everyone has time to step into the spotlight. And there's an equal balance of the players creating the story with the DM tying in what's important to them into the world, or else what's the point of having the background story?
Early on, I was doing most of the talking because everybody was nervous. They didn't know if they should be speaking, and so there was a lot of indecision. And so early on, I had to be this kind of forefront character. And unfortunately, for a while, it was basically the Artyom show.
Yeah, there was a few episodes like in the beginning where it was literally just me and Zach having a conversation, and I was just 10 different people.
Yeah. But they really started to pick up on it, and that's actually a common pitfall in podcasting is the 7-episode lull. Right around episode 7, you've done enough of it that you kind of have an idea for it, but you also don't feel like you're getting enough reward from it. You're not getting that instant reward mechanism of people falling in love and giving you feedback, and so you kind of just don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
But pushing past that's important.
And having like a really unique group is important. I feel like when you're looking for people, it's really vital to the progress of podcasts and media in general to make sure you've got a diverse group. If these are all your friends you've had since you were a kid, you're not getting the thoughts of outside voices. You're not getting any kind of like insight from other types of people that live from different places or have different backgrounds.
Yeah, it's so vital not to fall into the D&D stereotype. You don't want to necessarily exclude friends and people like that based off of any particular criteria, but saving a seat for people who are often overlooked or marginalized and not necessarily, and not only can it bring you like meaningful representation, but it can also give you a massive amount of perspective that maybe you as a creator could be really, really seriously lacking. And that's been so eye-opening, is realizing how different people see, how they see D&D, how they see play, how they see role play for themselves in a way that I never even thought about it.
And it gives you a lot of insight into like what they're looking for in the story too, the things that they want to see represented more that you don't see enough representation in, because having them at the table, they can tell you. Like they'll say like, I think it's important that we talk about this in this way because that's what I'd like to see. Be like, that's a great suggestion. I would have never thought of that, and I'm happy to do it.
And I think one thing to keep in mind is that it is a show. You're making something that people are trying to enjoy. And ideally, you want as many people as possible to not only enjoy it, but feel connected to it and feel some sense of agency and control over themselves and their own play and watching and appreciating this show. And so having that variety can be good. Mind you, in the end, because it's a show first, you can sometimes feel like you're not quite playing the game the way you would. It doesn't feel like it's your game. You're not winning. Or something like that.
There's a lot of things that make our recordings of LUQ, while the bread and butter is it's really just a very good traditional D&D game with great players. There's a lot of things that make it very different. Like as the DM, some of the pitfalls that I've found is because we have a very like necessary time limit on the kind of episodes, is learning how to manage the action versus the drama. Sometimes even before an episode starts, I'll be like, hey, just so everyone knows, like there's probably not going to be a fight in this episode unless you guys start one. So let's really work on some role play. Like let's create some scenes and let's explore the world. And if I do a big fight, there's a very good chance based on how D&D works that we'll get to like an hour and 20 minutes of recording and it's not over. The fight's not done. So learn how to like make fights end without necessarily it always being like they're all dead.
Yeah.
Or using things like skill challenges where you can have action in like 20 minutes. That's a great scene that doesn't involve the initiative one by one go.
I feel so unbelievably bad because Lob plans the most brilliant combats, the coolest fights, just the most exciting stuff. And then he has to cut it to like an hour and a half. And I don't know if you guys have ever played like big like battles. That is not going to get done in an hour and a half. And so watching him having to like kind of truncate a little bit. But what's great about it is, I mean, he's talented enough to make it so that you don't feel like it's ending unexpectedly. Like the transition is cinematic.
Right. So usually like the classic D&D template is you have a lot of small challenges which lead up to the one big challenge at the end. In this one, we can kind of narrate the smaller challenges in a smooth way. And then one full episode can be like a climax. Because while it's not ideal, you can get a pretty cool scene of combat in an hour and a half.
Yeah, I know. Absolutely. We get a lot of good action in there. And honestly, I'm routinely surprised by how well we all manage to keep a nice balance of who's speaking and how much battle we're having and things like that. And the hard part, I think, is that you really do have to change your whole formatting of how you play D&D in order to do it the way we do. Now, like, not to say you can't do it just like playing at the table. I mean, Critical Role does exactly that. They specifically say, like, we just want it to be D&D, our game. You're just watching. And they can get away with that because they're, incredibly successful voice actors and amazing talents and things like that. But when it comes to schmoes like me and Law, who are at best like semi-pro, you kind of have to just take the fact that you're kind of playing a show, not a game.
Yeah. So learning to limit your time and the things you expect, checking your expectations at the door is important.
And as you can tell, I'm not good at limiting my time.
But and you could make that decision. Like we were talking about earlier, figuring out your theme and what's important to you. You could very easily create a full podcast with no combat, no climaxes in action. It could all just be gripping narrative, dialogue, more scripting. So that's a choice you can make early on. And finding the right balance, if you decide you want to go for both, it's going to take you at least like 20 episodes to find out what that real balance is. We're just now really figuring out like, okay, we definitely need this much RP between action, and we definitely need this kind of action or else the party can't shine. And they're literally performers in the show. Like, these characters are trying to look cool because they're on camera.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one thing that I love about that is we're starting to develop our own sense of how much our characters are being developed. I regularly think to myself, like, where do I want Artyom to be in 5, 10, 20 episodes? What's the direction his life I want it to take? Who do I want him to become? And so I'll suggest a lot, like, hey, you know what? I really feel like this is something that this character doesn't get to deal with enough, and I want to see how he deals with that. I want the opportunity to face this challenge or what have you. And once you realize that that's what you're doing, there's a lot of good ways to include it.
Having open communication with your players and what their expectations are for the future is really, really good. You don't want them to be able to decide what's going to happen for you, but you do want to know what's important to them. Otherwise, they're just writing their own story, and that's less interesting. But one thing that we do with this that's unique to playing D&D is I'm going to bring back the mention of the 2 commentator characters. So me and Zach both play one of the announcers on the show, and they're in every episode, beginning, middle, and end. They're talking like they're hosting the live show. And those characters are Kip Killigan and Stormclad Thundertongue. Kip is a very small, fast-talking, charismatic halfling who knows just everything. And Storm, I'll let you describe Storm.
Storm's your kind of old, broken down ex-hero who's turned into his the stereotype of your announcer who knows a little bit more than the other guy.
Right. And they have their own building narrative going on top of the show. Like, they'll have stuff from their background slip in. They have their own bits. The contrast between the two of them, because you've got Kip Killigan, who announces that this is the League of Ultimate Questing, and he's the servant of the Nexus Enterprise, and and then Storm is like the real world old boy who knows the world and has explored things, loves to drink and eat and fight. But they also slip into some of the commercials, and I think that's an excellent transition into the next commercial to show more of our world building in the advertising.
Dungeons can be delved and monsters slain, but what about the last great adventure? Hi, I'm Stormclad Thundertongue. There comes a day in every hero's life when they stop and ask themselves how long they can go on. How long before they are felled by the greatest enemy of all, time. We can't all die gloriously on the battlefield, but for those who lived, there's Legendary Acres.
I knew happily ever after was too good to be true. The townsfolk could only hear the one about the terrace and the Darren's instant fortress so many times before they just tune it out. I wasn't about to be some wrinkly old has-been, boring the ears off of young'uns. So I took my untold riches and checked into Legendary Acres.
Don't wait for some young punk to get lucky, making a name for himself as the villain who slew the Herald of the Unblinking Eye. Legendary Acres exclusively employs prospective and recovering heroes, young men and women who will happily soak up decades or centuries of wisdom and experience.
These boys have never heard the exploits of the Marigold Mistress. They blush like young ladies.
For those with a little fight left in them, we offer the Twilight Gauntlet package, with custom dungeons, special monster encounters during outdoor time, and a relaxed rule set.
They never said I couldn't steal from that old paladin's room. If he wants the amulet of the thrice burned back, he's gonna have to find me first.
The other night I grabbed my cloak, and before I knew it, the damn thing had its teeth in my neck. A cloaker at my age. I still got it. And for the particularly long-lived, or those who just want peace, the Tranquil Gardens have an endless Arcadian bounty, with domesticated fae, with just the right amount of mischief. Of course, we keep fae away in every breathtaking cottage, just in case.
I'm 1,090 years old. I just want to be left alone. But at least I'll get to see dozens of these old humans leave through the back door before I check out.
For some, fading into legend comes when you least expect it. For the rest of us, there's Legendary Acres.
It's the League of Ultimate Questing! Find out more at slap-studios.com.
I love that. I love that commercial.
Me too. There's even a reference to another commercial in there with the fade-away.
Yes, but you'll just have to listen to find out more about that.
Yeah, we've got hundreds. So one thing that me and Zach are both simultaneously very good and very bad at is having self-confidence and selling ourselves, because the hustle matters. Like, it's really hard to tell people that you're doing something good, and it's hard to know you're doing something good until you get that feedback.
It's incredibly hard because you're really selling yourself is uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. And you can go a long time before anybody ever gives you any meaningful commentary if you're not out there trying to push yourself.
I feel like in the beginning when we really wanted like feedback, so we knew how to not plateau, how to keep getting better, we had to beg for it. Like, we had to ask close friends to like take a step back and give us unbiased opinions. We had to reach deep into the internet and find someone who had listened to it that we don't know. So that was a big first step, was getting the honest reviews.
Mm-hmm. And I think, once you actually develop a good community of people who can give you that feedback, being able to recognize it for what it is and being able to incorporate it into yourself is, well, difficult. But once you do, you can start growing from there. They feel really appreciated because, you listened to what they had to say and you started to make the changes that mattered. And then you feel good because you actually feel like you're connecting with your audience.
Mm-hmm. And it's really easy early on. Like we were saying, like in the early, 10 episodes and stuff, a lot can change. And it's super natural to get lost in the algorithm, because you'll be looking at the numbers, like your RSS, like how many people downloaded this week. And in the beginning, it's not going to be, unless you're like extremely fortunate or found some great connection before you began, it's not going to be inspiring. And you have to figure out at that point if you're continuing to do this for immediate gratification or if it's because it's an important project to you and you believe in it.
Yeah.
Because then that's what's going to make it sound better.
Because that's the thing, is if you're doing it for a paycheck, if you're trying to become rich and famous, or you're trying to become absurdly successful or something like that, imagine how embarrassed and upset and inadequate you'll feel when maybe people are enjoying it, but it's only 20 or so and you're not making any money. You're just going to feel like you failed, even though someone out there really likes what you're doing. Mm-hmm. But by contrast, if you're doing it just because you love it and you want to get it out into the world, that's going to show through. People are going to feel that when they're listening, and they're going to know that you're happy about what you're doing, and that's going to make them happy to listen to it.
Right. And knowing at the beginning, like, that you're interested in having this be full-time down the road, it can light a fire under your ass to be like, yeah, we're going to invest now. Like, we're going to spend thousands of dollars on good sound equipment and make sure we have a good team and all the resources we need. But you can't dwell on it in the beginning. It takes a very long time.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Because I said earlier, you can go a long time working in a vacuum, but I don't think you know how long. I mean, I know people who have been making like podcasts and similar content for something like 3 or 4 years, and they've never really gotten more than, say, 50 listeners per episode. Right. And for them, they never really care about who's listening. It's never important to them. And so they just keep doing it. It never breaks them down. They never feel like they failed, because to them, it was just about making something fun. It's an excuse to work together with people you like and build up the skill set. Because like for us, it was a practice thing too. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, if this one didn't go well, we wouldn't have stopped. It would have been like, okay, luck wasn't great. Let's try something else. New project. Yeah.
Like, the sports thing's not cutting it. We're either going back to Pokemon or we're figuring something new out.
Screw this. I'm going back to Pokemon.
And that doesn't mean you can't work on other ventures like while you're focusing on your thing. Because like we while we have the League of Ultimate Questing, we're Slapdash Studios. Like, we want to grow by finding other podcasts in like our area, for example, that want to work with us. Like, we have guest players come sometimes that work on their own projects. We don't just do LUQ. We also have D20 questions, where we kind of interview gaming moguls in the region, and me and Zach and them imbibe a lot of adult beverages. And as the show gets longer and longer, we get more into our cups and really discuss the things. We have had people like Keith Baker, Marshall Short from Printable Heroes, Anthony Caffiero from Orcs, another panel on this weekend's roster. Mm-hmm. And we Twitch stream. We still play Pokemon. Like, we haven't stopped playing Pokemon.
Yeah. And that's what's weird is, like, you know, when we went into it, we didn't know it was going to be podcasting, but we knew that we both liked making all kinds of content. We weren't going to limit ourselves to, okay, it's going to be Pokemon only, it's going to be YouTube only, it's going to be video only. And as we've gotten more, as we've reached out more and more, and as we've developed fans who like everything we do, it's gotten easier and easier to want to make other content, you know, like you want to throw out those, you know, just custom made commercial things that you can just throw on Facebook, or you want to start streaming because you're looking forward to giving your fans something to do, and also you're just looking forward to talk to your fans.
Right. And the big value in having this fan base grow and making sure you like stay in touch with them, giving them a place to talk to you. Like we're nowhere near the point where like there's so many fans that we get annoyed talking to them. Like, the more the merrier at this point, because it's always immediate feedback. We'll learn, like, people like, hey, I really like this NPC, or I really like the scene, and we're like, that works. Okay, we can use that.
There really is no annoyance at all. Like, even the ones who ask more challenging questions, or like you think to yourself, well, this person's going to get annoying, but it doesn't, because you start to think to yourself, well, they're actually asking questions that matter. I have to actually think about this stuff. And if they're asking it, imagine how many people are thinking it and not saying it. It's just such a great perspective to have.
And like, even as a DM, it can be really stressful to have people who have what you're saying on record in a podcast and being able to like take their own notes and ask questions about what's canonical and stuff. And while that can be like imposing and sound like a deterrent, you're also thinking like, these people really like the story that's happening. Like, they're invested in the world and the lore because they're asking what happened 5,000 years ago, or what does this city really mean? Or it's scary, but it's so cool.
Well, and for us, we also do things that aren't just the announcers and the commercials. We also do meta segments, little clips from in the world. Sometimes it's a classroom at a arcane, you know, school, or sometimes it's a weird, sinister, you know, encounter with these dark, scary people, you know, but it's happening in world, but not on the show. And so when those happen, having people asking questions about the canon of the world, and you realize, oh crap, you know what? I've never mentioned anything about this world. Bam, that's an excuse to throw in a really cool little sound bit from some other part of the world. Bam, everybody loves it. You have fun writing it, and now there's new information getting circulated into your fan base.
Right, because the creation of content is the big thing, because we have a weekly deadline. That means every week we have to edit the episode, because we do it in batches. So you get a little peek behind the scenes in how we make our podcast sausages. We meet up once a month roughly and do 4 episodes as a group, and then we, you know, release those a week at a time. And during that week, that's when, like, me and Zach will look at what's coming up in this episode. I'll write the script for Kip and Storm. I'll give it to him. He can change Storm to be in his own voice, which I encourage. And I think that's a great dynamic Kip and Storm have, is the fact that we both get to kind of choose how they say their lines.
Yeah.
We make the commercial, we make the meta, we decide which one's which, and we'll take turns doing them. And at the end of each week, we have to have all of those separate things done. So if people give you more ideas, like, hey, what's the deal with like the Kamaris? I want to learn more about that. It's like, thank you. Now I have an extra bit for the end of this week. I know what my second segment is. That's what I need. And
we just recently sat down with a friend of ours who gave us amazing new meta ideas for how we can bring more sporty stuff into it. Because Law and I are not, admittedly, very sporty people. We're not huge into the ball games. And so having somebody there who could be like, oh, here's all this cool stuff that I love about sports, suddenly we can just completely blossom out.
Yeah, or even like talking to people who don't know D&D and want to listen to it as an entertainment show. Because there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, I've never really played, but this is a fun story. That can be valuable. And like, one of my biggest tips that I even share with Zach sometimes too is like, it's hard to make all that content, but if you have an idea, just don't wait to do it. Like, I'm not saying it has to be the final draft, but like for the commercials, if one pops in my head and I'm at my computer, I will make it right then and there, or I will forget, I will procrastinate, and it won't get done.
Without fail, I think the best piece of advice you can give anybody is to just do it. Just do it. It's like, worst case scenario, it's terrible. And then you just try again. I mean, you literally, nobody picks something up the first time and is automatically perfect. At best, you're going to pick something up and already feel like you're maybe intermediate or at least a high novice. But in the end, you got to practice. You got to keep trying. And the inertia that it takes to like break, to actually get up and do it is huge. And honestly, I learned how to do that from Law, who just like, when he has a commercial idea, he just suddenly starts making it. And ever since he's done that, you know, when I have an idea of my own something that I want to do, I just started to do it. Unfortunately, I don't have nearly as many ideas as he does.
We have a delegation of work right now. That's a big part of it. Learning to delegate tasks too actually is a really good point, because while Zach's like recording during the shows, we decided that like while you're on the control panel, like you're going to be doing the producing. I'm going to be DMing. I'm going to be, you know, knee deep in miniatures and maps and stuff, and I'm going to be focused on my story. So you can do that during the week. It'll be very clear, like, hey, I have an important thing, or I'm really sick. Can you do the editing on this one? And communicating early on. Like our Google Drive is nuts. There's so much stuff on there, but having that thing we can share and kind of help each other organize is really, really big.
That's something nobody ever told me, is how much data it takes to save all this stuff. Like, because we're saving in WAV format, which is like very uncompressed, pure, crisp audio. And then we're talking like 250 megabytes per person per episode. So it's like 1.5 gigs. So right now I've got like a whole terabyte and a half of my computer is taken up by all this stuff. And that's on top of whatever's on the drive. And I'm just like, every time I think about the idea of organizing it, I have like a panic attack.
Right. We have a lot of assets. Like each project that we work on has its own logo. All of our Twitch streams or YouTube videos have their own overlay or title cards. We've got over like 100 commercials at this point. I think it's like 130 at this point, something in that ballpark. Then there's the meta, all of the Kip and Storm scripts on top of the audio for them as well. And we just uploaded a bunch of memes because we do those as well. And there's like 1,000. Like it's a lot of JPEGs.
I'm looking forward to like just getting into all the ones that you've created over the years.
It's a walk down memory lane. And this is kind of a hard truth thing. We don't want to like beat around the bush for stuff that can really help you. Showbiz is brutal. So like one thing is selling yourself. You got to be pushy. Like, you know, you don't want to make people hate you, but you got to get your foot in the door. But another one is if you have resources before you start, you've got a leg up. It just so happens that I had a very big presence with memes online, and it's not a huge boon, but the fact that I can share our podcast stuff with this large audience of like 600,000 people who want memes, it did help. Like if you are already connected, you'll have a leg up, and that's just the sad bottom truth.
And in addition to that, like, it's also who you know. If you have friends or a connection with someone who's successful, who already has a huge Twitter following, or maybe is in movies or something like that, who likes this kind of stuff, getting a foot in there is a huge deal. I mean, honestly, one of the major, explosions that we had for fans was when Travis Vengroff from Dark Dice reached out to us, and he was like, "Your stuff is really good. We want to do a cross promotion on this." And we felt weird because we didn't really have that big of a fan base at the time.
Yeah.
But he was just like, no, it's good. We want it out there. And so the second he did it, huge explosion. And we wouldn't even be where we are right now if it wasn't for that.
Yeah, that was our most recent, like, huge jump. And that was, almost like half a year ago at this point.
Yeah.
And it's funny to learn that too, because like there can be some big people that like I met Travis at a Level Up, which is a charity fundraiser. Was it Level Up?
Level Eater?
Level Eater, yeah, my mistake. And he actually came up and saw that I was handing out some stickers because I was DMing, and was like, "Oh my God, I love your podcast." And we were both like starting at the same time. So seeing how they've grown and we can help each other in that, it was so surreal being like, this is the person that came and talked to me. And now a year later, we're going to do cross promotion together. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm routinely shocked by the number of people who just kind of get it, and like how many people like seem to be talking about it. And every time somebody on Twitter references us that I've never heard of before, and I'm just like, okay, random person who seems to run a podcast that likes my podcast. All right, thank you.
Yeah. Even like a lot of people, this is maybe just a sad societal truth, but like you want to share the stuff you're working on with your friends, and all your friends are like, "Oh yeah, totally, I'll check it out." But in this case, like they did, like all of them, and now I'll just be like hanging out with people I work with or just hang out with sometimes, and they'll make jokes about the podcast and get it with each other, like in front of me, and I'm like, really? You guys actually remember that?
But I will also say on the inverse, you can't be terribly wounded if your best friend doesn't really want to listen. Some people just don't love D&D podcasts. They'd rather play than listen to somebody else play. And sometimes, the people who you were so convinced would fall in love with it, they just weren't a big fan. And at first you really want to take that personally. You think to yourself, like, did I do something wrong? Is it not good? You don't want to bug them about it. Sometimes it just doesn't land. And sometimes they just don't have time for it. And you got to be comfortable with that kind of rejection.
Yeah. The best you can do is know what audience you're going to appeal to, and then just be surprised if you happen to reach more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like looking at the categories that we chart on, Like in this past few months is when we've actually started showing up on the charts in a big way. In May, we were like top 20 gaming podcasts of the US. Like just saying that out loud is unreal. But sometimes we'll be like top 10 leisure podcasts in Finland. It's like, what? That's awesome, but how?
Yeah, no, I mean, really early on in our releases, we were noticing a shocking number of people in Denmark listening, and we were like, "Wait, hold on, Denmark?" It made up like 15% of our audience. So for a while in the mid rolls, we would mention how much we appreciate the Danes, just this dumb little joke, and then at some point, someone referenced the possibility that maybe they're not actually from Denmark, that it's VPNs, a lot of which are hosted in the Fenniscandian like territory, and I was like, "Oh my god!" And so I just realized that we've been thanking people who never listen, and I was like sitting there thinking, like, how are there no Danes out there on Twitter land telling us how much they love the show by now if there's already thousands of like it's just
The best case scenario in that, though, is we end up actually getting a lot of Danish listeners who hear the early episodes are like, oh, cool.
I keep hoping that someday there's going to be a Dane who's just like, thank you so much.
So one of the most important things you were getting from like the feedback we're talking about, like things that people like, things that people don't like, is sometimes there'll be, as a DM, you always have NPCs. That just happens. And creating really good characters in your game, like throwbacks to them down the road. Sometimes those can show up for us, like in our commercials. Like there's one character in particular that people are a big fan of, and his name is Bonerick Axebreaker, who's kind of like the Bob Villa. What's
Bob Villa, I think.
Yeah. Only he works on dungeons. So here's a commercial to show you. And this one's actually an animatic. It's one of our only animatics, but I think you'll enjoy.
Hey there, I'm Bonerick Axebreaker, and welcome back to another episode of Getter Dungeon. Today we're going to continue renovating last week's classic Age of Arcana dungeon main floor, and today the theme is recycling. Now, look at this old door. Things rusted over and rotten from the center. A barbarian's gonna come along and kick this thing right off its hinges, no problem. DC 8 or 10 max. Now, we're gonna use a few spare parts from a previous renovation and get this bad boy up to a DC 15, maybe 18. Might even throw in a poison trap. We'll see where the day goes. Now, see here in this corner? Yep, we got black mold. Now, it's just a challenge rating 2 black mold, so it ain't hurting nobody. Save for maybe a party rogue who sneaks too far ahead of the group. We're just gonna let that be. Now, I've opened up this old pit trap, and boy howdy, there's a lot of dust down here. The spikes look like dwarven steel, so they've held up pretty good over the eons, and look at that. I count 5 decomposed bodies. I'm going to call my friend, who's a bit of a necromancy contractor, and we're going to turn those into some undead minions to help keep this place on its toes. Now that's recycling. Tune in every Sunday for another episode of Getter Dungeon, brought to you exclusively by the Nexus Enterprise.
It's the League of Ultimate Questing! Find out more at slap-studios.com.
I love it. I love Bonerick Axebreaker so much. You've just got that like perfect Midwestern accent that I adore.
That's more of the stuff where we work together on voices. And that's the thing, like, for example, that can grow with time. Because like the original Getter Dungeon logo did not read well in video. It was very fine in PNG format. So now we have a much nicer, easier to read one.
It looks great. I'm routinely surprised by those animatics. Then I'm just like, man, I can't believe Law's doing that and all this other stuff. It's a lot.
And I don't think the motivation would be there if we didn't have our fan base. We've got to take time to really thank the group of people that are on our Discord, on our Patreon. Like, they are all of the motivation. Like, seriously. They're so kind. They're so involved. They come to all of our streams that we play random video games in. They have movie nights together where they watch online. And they're active. Our Discord is going all the time, and all of them. We even had a period where we were trying to figure out what to call fans of the LUQ. There was like slap dashers for a minute. We ended up with LU cuties, which we're huge fans of. That's what we call them in every mid-roll. So we're grateful for the cuties.
I absolutely love that. And honestly, I want to give individual shout outs, but I'd be so worried about like leaving somebody out. And I can't do that. So thank you all so much for being such a consistent member of our fan base. I especially want to thank those of you who've done fan art and things like that. Like if you guys want to check out our fan art, feel free to check out our Twitter or our Instagram. All of it can be found at Slap the Dash. You can also go to slap-studios.com or the luq.com to find all that kind of stuff. But like,
down there is
we have a link, and they should be posting that in the comments and everything like that too. So that'll be exciting. But I think in general for me, everything comes down to the people who watch and the people who enjoy. And I don't think my life would be as happy and as joyful and successful as I feel I am right now without them.
Yeah. Even in an anecdote, like yesterday going in to help close down the bar that I work at, someone walks in wearing an LUQ shirt. And it's just this surreal moment of being like, this person likes my show and bought my shirt, and now they're here. Or like out on the street or at a con. It's so wonderful.
It's baffling to think that something you make is enjoyed by entire auditoriums full of human beings on a daily basis, and you just think, okay, well, is this what famous is? Because I don't feel that. I feel like a chump.
Right. Even like the Discord, the fans we share memes and stuff all the time. They very frequently will post a meme and be like, "Oh, I made that 4 years ago."
I love it. I love it every time they do that. When you're like, "Oh, that was me."
It's a great circle of content creation.
Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, I think the bottom line for our message is don't be scared to get started right now. Like, you're not going to do yourself any favors by waiting more. Every day you wait, 5 new D&D podcasts may in fact come out,
and they might even take your idea right up from under you.
So learning how invested you want to get. If you had told us when we started that me and Zach would form like an LLC like we have, like I would have been dubious at that. Be like, really, that much for this game podcast thing? And I'm so glad we did. It's rewarding. We've got huge plans for the future. Like we're not looking at any stopping points. We're looking at spreading out our branches in all these different directions.
Ways in which we can change and grow and shift the content, the format. And it's going to be really exciting. Honestly, right down the pipeline, we've got some amazing things coming. So I hope you can jump in there and be one of those people who shows up in our Discord and say, I just spent the last 2 days listening to nothing but your podcast, and now I'm caught up and I'm very upset because I want more.
And don't be scared to research the ways you can have like a Patreon. Like honestly, most good quality, hardworking content creators deserve a Patreon, I think. And learning what rewards you can give people. We have like people who can listen to the cutting room floor of our episodes and listen to goofs and things in our Discord. We give people free maps. We use a lot of custom class builds and racial stuff in the game for the playable races. And we can have people have those as Discord rewards, magic items and stuff like that. You've got, every time you create something, you're creating a resource you can use as a reward.
And I mean, you'd be shocked how many people just like fall in love with these things. You know, the reactions that you get, it feels really good. And then when you're making extra content, like with D20 questions, with our bonus episodes where we're already pretty well soused and just kind of shouting at each other and having a great time, like those episodes are some of my favorites.
Yeah. And you can maximize your content creation. A really quick, easy example is I can record a video of me making a D&D map. I can turn that into a YouTube video that helps our YouTube. I can use that map during LUQ as the board that the players are playing on, and I can use it as a Patreon reward for our LUQties. Like it's a 3-strike combo from one sit down.
So just think about all the ways that you can help your own community, all the people who not only listen to your show, but people who aren't even necessarily a part of it, and just trying to find ways to enrich the nerddom world.
Yeah. Find a good partner or partners, people who are good at things that you are not, and people who can call you out on your bad behavior, people who can help you reach your creative goals and who have the same goals as you.
Try again and again and again to make content. Never stop trying, never stop failing. And when you fail, just try to make it better and better every single time.
Yep. Feedback is everything.
I want to thank everybody so much for coming here to this panel. We've had an amazing time doing it. I always love talking to Law about any of this kind of stuff and just like using it as an opportunity for nostalgia and retrospect.
It's a walk down memory lane. Like I said, it feels good.
So if you want to check us out, as you know, we've mentioned probably a dozen times now, go to the luq.com or slapdashstudios.com. They both go to the exact same place. Come to our Discord. Feel free to ask us questions after this show. Feel free. You know, we can do an open Q&A in the general chat. But I think that's it.
A big shout out and thank you to Left Field Media and Epic Quest for letting us have a panel.
So much. This has been such a great experience.
Yeah. But until next time, we wish you luck.
It's the League of Ultimate Questing.